Really happy to introduce Dr. John Wade this morning. He's a really close friend of mine, and many of you all know him very well. He's a retired dean and former economics professor. Somehow, Eastern Kentucky University still convinces him to teach some classes in business and economics, even though he's retired. But I think more importantly that I want to share a story. Me and John were having a conversation as he was getting ready to prepare this homily, and John knows so much about economics, obviously. And I was talking to him, and he was like, I want to do one on opioids and the opioid crisis, and I was like, I think that's a really important topic. That sounds great. And he was telling me the subtitle of his homily was about opioids. Has capitalism failed us? And I was just like, yes. That's a pretty short homily. Is everybody ready to go home? Well, I guess we could stop by and have some dinner somewhere, or whatever you would like. But no, in all seriousness, this is a very deeply important topic. I suspect that John will be sharing more of us in detail about the economics of the pharmaceutical industry and how that is related to the opioid crisis that we're witnessing, that's touched many of our lives and many lives in this room. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to John Wade to share more.
Thank you, Michael, for that generous introduction. So as Michael indicated, I'm going to just look at the economic aspects of this crisis. Certainly there are medical aspects and many other approaches to looking at the opioid crisis. And I know that many of you probably have had friends or family that have been touched by it. I have a cousin who has a grandchild that's addicted. My brother-in-law, who passed last summer, was addicted to legal pills, and when he passed, he had hoarded over 200 OxyContin pills, which my sister took down to the Lexington Police Department to get rid of for her. I indicated that I could have helped with that using my contacts on campus, but of course that was just in jest, of course. That. So, and of course, I don't have to tell you that it's touched all economic categories. My sister goes to a large mainline church in Lexington. There was a family there, she says, probably was worth 9 figures, i.e. over $100 million, who lost a son to the crisis a few years ago. My great niece was at a graduation party in Lexington in December. She went to Madison Central and graduated from Western last year. She had a friend from Central who graduated from UK, and so she went to a party, and a young man died at the party from a fentanyl overdose. And he just sat down in a chair and fell asleep, and then they couldn't wake him up, and then the EMTs came and the party was over. So those sorts of things. And the young man had just graduated earlier that day, and then died that night. Hadn't even made his first student loan payment, probably. Sorry, I had black humor about that. So what are opioids? Well, they are legally prescribed painkillers, oxy this and that, oxycodone, OxyContin. OxyContin is essentially a legal form of heroin that was brought to the market by Purdue Pharmaceuticals, no relation to Purdue University, my alma mater. And it is a privately owned company. You may have heard of the Sackler family. They have given billions to places like Tufts University to have their names on buildings, etc., from those profits. It's overprescribed. It's available on the street. Then there are the illegal variants such as heroin, a street drug, and we know about that. I was going to put a picture on the program of a needle and a spoon, but Michael talked me out of it, and so you just got rhododendrons this morning from my collection. And then there's fentanyl, which is extremely powerful, which is a synthetic opioid. There are legal versions. There's a publicly traded corporation in Arizona, Insys Pharmaceutical, that sells a watered-down version of that, primarily for pain management with cancer patients. And we'll talk a little bit about how that backfired on them when they got a little overzealous in their capitalist approach to selling that drug. Very powerful, short-acting drug. So what does pill distribution look like? The darker the shading, the more pills per capita. Look where Kentucky is. We're in the heart of it there, along with West Virginia, Tennessee, all up Appalachia, Pennsylvania. Ohio has areas that are hard hit from that. Drug overdose mortality by state. Again, the darker shading. And then, of course, we are right in the middle of that. You can't see the numbers down here, but that here we go. Yeah, it's back on. You didn't want us to hear you sing? I stand way over there when I do this. The supply chain was interesting to me. I had not seen this before. I saw it in a business publication a few months ago. It starts with poppy farmers, and there are 3 spots in the world where it's legal to grow poppies: Tasmania, the island off Australia, Turkey, and India. Then the farmers sell it to processors who take the raw poppies and then extract the useful part, and then that is sold to drug manufacturers who further process it into the pill form or an injection or whatnot. And then, yes. That Janssen Pharmaceutical, by the way, is a division of Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson is a unique corporation that it's made up of a bunch of independent, semi-independent companies that share accounting functions, et cetera, and Janssen is one of those. Interestingly enough, Johnson & Johnson also owned a processor, which they sold 3 years ago. Why would they sell that? I don't know if my battery's dying or what here, but it comes with old age, I guess. Then the drug manufacturers don't actually send the pills to the drugstores. There are 3 main drug distributors. These are publicly held corporations: McKesson, Cardinal Healthcare, and AmerisourceBergen. You may have seen them in the headlines a little bit because one possible spot for capitalist failure is they've over-distributed the drugs. You know, without question, they will send a small pharmacy in a town of 500 in West Virginia over 1 million pills a year. What could possibly go wrong? right? Then there are the drugstores. Are they at fault? You know, CVS is sometimes, some of their locations may have been a little overzealous in passing out the pills. I listed Boonville Discount Drugs in Boonville, Kentucky, in Owsley County, I believe that is, because they got in the news one day for how many pills that they were processing. Does anyone know how many drugstores are in Manchester, Kentucky, population 2,500? The county seat for Clay County, Kentucky. There are 11 drugstores in a town of 2,500. How about that? Then you have your doctors or prescribers who get the pills out there in the public. And as Barbara indicated, and as I've seen once when I had a little outpatient procedure, oh, here's 2 weeks of these pills. You know, I took 1 or 2. I don't need these pills. What are these for? That was before, you know, this was 25 years ago, before opioids became so in the news. And then there are the patients. Are we responsible? You know, oftentimes we rely on the advice of our physicians, and we trust our doctors, right? And I didn't have time for a YouTube video, but a TED Talk actually by a bioethicist on the faculty at Johns Hopkins University who was in a motorcycle accident, mangled his foot, and he talked in the TED Talk. Well, he had pain, and so they gave him opioids, and he took them long enough that he became addicted. And then he had one hell of a time trying to get off of those, you know, the 2 weeks of withdrawal. And the doctors will help you get on the pills, but they don't know how to help you get off the pills, you know, and so he suffered till he got off of it. And then I put the government here because the government oversees markets in many cases, and certainly they oversee the prescription drug market. The Food and Drug Administration has to approve medications. The Drug Enforcement Agency has to approve early in the process who can process these things and what farmers can sell to the processors, et cetera. And similar agencies and governments around the world oversee all this process. So, oops, wrong button. So who's at fault? Well, there's the whole supply chain. You can just look at it, and I've kind of indicated, you know. Is it the farmers, the processors, the pharmaceutical companies, the drug distributors, the drugstores, the doctors, us? The government for lax oversight of all that. You know. Here's some statistics. The Drug Enforcement Administration reports that between 2006 and 2012, 73 billion doses of opioids were distributed in the United States. More recently, I saw that they took the numbers to 2015, and that number jumped to 100 billion doses and 100,000 overdose deaths in that time. I'm one of those old-fashioned people that still gets the hard copy of the newspaper. However, that's going to end pretty soon. $1,300 a year is a little much for me, for the Herald Leader. That's another story. But I looked through the obituaries. 27 years old, 22 years old, 31 years old. You see those. You know, was it a car wreck? Was it a birth defect that long-lasting, or was it an overdose? You don't know. It's common. So, who's to blame? Here's some specific cases that we talked about, the supply chain and where the fault might be. Is it overprescribed by doctors? Well, in my home state of Virginia, not too far from where I grew up in Martinsville, Dr. Joel Smithers was indicted by the government on 860 counts of illegally prescribing drugs without doing the due diligence that a doctor should do in his examination. Patients, and I use the term loosely, would run into Dr. Smithers in the parking lot, and he would happen to have his prescription pad in his pocket, and he would write you a prescription for only $100. So he's going away for 40 years. So, too many pills distributed. Clay County, 2.8 million doses per year through 11 drugstores there. Many of them are independent. The drug distributors have been sued. Those three companies I listed, Cardinal, Amerisource, McKesson, $50 billion settlement. Also included Janssen Pharma division of Johnson & Johnson and a generic drug maker, Teva Pharmaceutical. Is the problem lax regulation by the Food and Drug Administration? Some say OxyContin should never have been put in drugstores, and it should have only been dispensed in hospitals to hospital patients. And I kind of subscribe to that theory personally. And the patients. I tend not to blame farmers or the patients because we trust our medical professionals to look out in our best interest. And of course, being a farm boy, we're never at fault, are we, Hober? We do the best we can to do that sort of thing. So, here's a few more numbers. Here's the number of pills distributed by some well-known drug distributors. The larger pharmaceutical firms do their own drug distribution, so they get the drugs directly from the Mercks and the Pfizers and the Johnson & Johnsons, et cetera. So McKesson was at the top of the opioid list with over 14 billion doses distributed. Walgreens, which is a large national drugstore chain with presence here in Madison County, 12.6 billion pills, et cetera, on down the line. So the three top drug distributors are in the top four here, with Walgreens wedged in there. Then CVS, Walmart, which has a large pharmaceutical division, et cetera. Kroger, not so much. So some perhaps have been a little bit more attuned to it in their training of their pharmacists than perhaps others have. But of course, the more you sell, what does your profit do? It goes up, and of course, if you're a publicly traded firm, every 3 months in this country you report your profits, and you want to tell your stockholders and the financial community that you're making more money, and so there's pressure to do that sort of thing. I thought we might take, we'll get a little short on time, maybe 3 minutes and talk amongst yourselves about any solutions to this problem that you see. So if you get in groups of 2 or 3, talk to your neighbors, see what you think the solutions are, and then I'll compare it to my list on the next slide. So, by the playground or whatever, the illegal distribution of all that. So, as Karen indicated, one thing that I thought of was to restrict prescribing authority, keeping it in hospitals and hospice centers and things like that. Harm reduction, needle exchange, testing kits. In Huntington, West Virginia, the EMTs, when they go to revive someone, someone stays back and talks with the family members and say, okay, here is a breathing kit to help restore breathing, some kind of device, the next time it happens, so that, and they've reduced the death rate in Huntington a good bit with some of their proactive efforts. Unfortunately, as the government has restricted the legal pills, the illegal, the heroin, the street heroin, has made a comeback, because you're addicted, you can't get the pills, then you go to the park, the street corner, or whatnot. If Lita were here, she would tell us about finding needles on her walks around her neighborhood near downtown Richmond, that sort of thing. Methadone clinics, rehab centers. I understand that methadone has very bad withdrawal symptoms as well. So I don't know too much about methadone. Some have said marijuana legalization might. And of course, its cousin, CBD oil, that doesn't have the high that Linda mentioned. Madison County, the solution that our county board wants to take is a bigger jail. And both liberals and conservatives have come out against that sort of thing. I wanted to end by mentioning the Sackler family, the owners of Purdue Pharma. They don't quite get along too well. It's the second generation that owns it. But they have reaped billions from the sale of OxyContin. They made a settlement recently. Purdue Pharma has gone into bankruptcy because of all these lawsuits. 2,000 or so city and county and state governments are suing these turkeys for their bad behavior. Just before they went into bankruptcy, guess what they did? Swiss bank account, yeah, $3 billion transferred secretly that was uncovered, I think, by the New York Times or prosecutors. And then one that we don't hear much about, Insys Pharma, a company in Arizona, legally sells a watered-down version of fentanyl. The main product is a drug called Subsys, a sublingual liquid form of fentanyl used for cancer patients in pain. And certainly cancer patients deserve pain management. But the head of the company had his employees look at who the top prescribers were and went to them and offered illegal kickbacks if they would prescribe even more. And federal prosecutors uncovered that crime, and the company founder was sentenced to 66 months in jail just this past week. This company is publicly traded. 5 years ago, you could have bought shares of stock in it for $40 a share. Today, they trade for 5 cents. I'm glad I didn't invest in that company, would you? 1,000 shares would be $40,000. Today, they're worth $50. Ooh. So victims told the judge they were prescribed a highly addictive opiate that they did not need. They described losing their teeth and being unable to put two thoughts together as they lived in a haze of addiction. And they asked the judge to give the full sentence of 15 years, as did prosecutors. And the judge says, well, he's 66 years old, only 6.5 years. And then, he probably has $1 billion or $2 billion stashed somewhere. In fact, the article intimated that he was already a billionaire before he started this company. I wish I could leave you on a happier note. I was kind of shocked to see so many people here on such a morbid topic today. Thank you for coming, and let's be safe out there. Thank you.
So I will.